Good afternoon everyone and welcome to this HSJ webinar to discuss collaboration between the NHS and industry and how that's reflected in the NHS long-term plan. I'm Deb Lancaster, I'm from Novartis where I'm the Head of Access for the Oncology Division, and I'm joined by...
Hi, I'm Brad Groves, I'm the Deputy Operational Lead for the Cancer Drugs Fund at NHS England.
Hello, good afternoon, I'm Tony Paluca, I'm Professor of Haematology at King's College Hospital and Professor of Stem Cell Transplantation, and I'm here representing the NHS side of delivery of these innovative new products we're going to discuss today.
Thanks very much for joining us. So obviously the long-term plan places the emphasis on the importance of collaboration and different bodies working together to deliver care to patients. Yeah. So how do you see collaboration as it stands at the moment with the NHS and industry in particular, and how do you think that could be improved in the future?
I think coming up from a Cancer Drugs Fund perspective, we have quite good collaboration with companies, and I think CAR-T is a good example of quite good collaboration with companies. I think the success in that is because we're working with new treatments that are coming into the NHS, we're often having to introduce something novel. There are a lot of questions on the company side. There's a process to go through with the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence. NHS England has its own unique commissioning perspectives that need to be brought together, and I think when we engage in multi-party conversations like that with the company, that's often a really good way to flush out those conversations, and doing that as early as possible is a good way to collaborate. So from a commissioning perspective, NHS England perspective, it's really that early multi-stakeholder collaboration that works, but I guess it's probably a little bit different from the provider side.
Well, I think it's true. I mean, the industry and the NHS have collaborated very, very well for many years. I think that with this innovative new therapy, CAR-T therapy that we're talking about today, what we've seen is a transformation in the approach. And that's really driven by the fact that we have amazing new drugs, new products coming to market, which are not going through the standard process of a phase 1, a phase 2 and a phase 3 study, which under normal circumstances would take us 5 to 7 years to get to the point that this product would be licensed, and there would have been multiple conversations by the industry with NICE, with the Office of Market Access and many others, including NHS England. But on this occasion, we've had such dramatic data coming out from studies. These products were licensed very early on in the process. So instead of taking 5 to 7 years, they've taken 3 to 5 years, which I think in some ways caught everyone, I'm not going to say on the hop, but no one was quite expecting it to happen so quickly. So that has meant that we've had to work very collaboratively to get this to work. And that has been testament to the industry input into it, to NHS England's input into it, to NICE's input into it. And of course, at the end of the day, that enlightened people felt that the data was so good, they were willing to trial it through the process, through the CDF. So we have had to, I always say, get to know each other's inside leg measurements in a way that perhaps historically we never did, because it was the industry on that side and the NHS and the clinician hospitals on the other side. But on this occasion, we've spent 2 years working very collaboratively with the industry, being open and transparent about the information that's available, showing all the information that's available, and trying to understand from lessons learned in the United States how we could ensure that we put in a system, a process in the UK that was safe, effective, and delivered this fantastic treatment to our patients to give us a footprint which many of my colleagues in Europe are really jealous of. So there's nothing nothing not to like about this situation.
And I guess in terms of that sort of envy from Europe to some extent, this, again, thinking of CAR-T as an example, is one treatment where only days after the European marketing authorization was given, we actually had an agreement in place with Novartis on that occasion. And then within 3 months, we were actually treating the first patient as well. That's a really rare or a really shortened timeline. So going to Tony's point about how we're a little bit caught on the hop, part of that was because we actually truncated those timelines to get patient access so much sooner. And it was a really successful process as well, but couldn't have been done, as Tony says, without us all knowing each other's inside leg measurement. But that really close partnership was what made that successful.
But I think, as Brad has said, though, if you think back, I always say, someone says, oh, so-and-so is an amazing footballer. Did it happen yesterday? No, it didn't. It happened with significant time, planning, process, learn how to do something. Well, actually, we got a little bit of a head start because the government had looked quite carefully through the regenerative medicine policies that it was developing that go back 4 or 5 years. NICE had actually reviewed a cellular therapy product. Could this product be assessed using current NICE guidance? So, I was involved in most of those things. So we were already half prepared. And then NHS England stepped up to the plate. A number of individuals put together the ATMP policy. Then they put together, collaboratively with the industry, both the specific specifications for these products, and we used the CRG platform, clinical reference group platform that we have in the United Kingdom, to ensure that we had the input from the right people. We had patient and public voice involvement, which is absolutely paramount in my view to making sure you do the right thing for patients. And all that together, and then out to public consultation. And despite all the rush, we got all of that done. So hats off to NHS England, hats off to NICE, and hats off for the industry for working with us to ensure that the delivery end was also prepared. And I think we have an excellent system now in that we are trying to ensure that we have equitable access. Some of you will know that many colleagues in the United States, where that's not the case, these products have been licensed in the United States, but the Medicare, Medicaid have not quite agreed what the perfect solution to payment of these products is. You have many patients having to travel vast distances to access these therapies, whereas in the UK, with the model that we've set up, hopefully, once we get the second phase of centres in place, patients may not have to travel more than they would have to travel if they were having a bone marrow transplant, which we've done as a hub and spoke for many, many years. So I think we've created a great platform to collaborate with Novartis and to collaborate with other companies that are going to come through with these novel and exciting products.
Brad, obviously these new medicines are going through the CDF at the moment. Would you like to talk a little bit about that and how the collaboration with the providers and industry have worked with regards to the CDF?
Yes, so in terms of the collaboration with industry, the Cancer Drugs Fund gives us a space where we can introduce drugs at a much earlier point in their appraisal process with NICE. So what tends to happen when a drug goes through NICE is that they'll either say yes or no, but if it's a cancer topic, the committee can also recommend the drug into the Cancer Drugs Fund for a managed access period. So during that time, we collect additional data, the clinical trial continues to run, and after the period of managed access ends, we'll reassess the topic or the treatment. And that's very much what's happening with all the CAR-T products at the moment. The outcomes are so uncertain, or we just don't have they're not that uncertain. We don't have the follow-up data for enough over a long enough time to be able to assess the true effectiveness of these treatments. So the Cancer Drugs Fund has given us that space to bring the drugs so that they're available to patients sooner. And in that context as well, the Cancer Drugs Fund also gives us additional commercial flexibilities. So Novartis has been very flexible, as have other companies, with the bringing CAR-T treatments forward. So we've got additional discounts that account for that uncertainty, and that has enabled us then to offer those in the CDF, and it has meant then we can engage with the providers in a much more earnest conversation about how we make this available to them.
And do you think that's going to work as we move forward? There are lots and lots of CAR-Ts in development right across the biotech industry. Do you think that this same model of collaboration between industry, provider and NHS England is going to work, or is it going to need fine-tuning as we move forwards?
It's going to need some fine-tuning. There are some real strengths in what we've done, and I think we've learnt an awful lot through the process that we've gone through here. So it hasn't been perfect from any one perspective, I would say. We've all, I think, learnt how to do this a bit better.
It's completely new.
and yeah, to be fair to us all, it's completely new, and it really is a game-changing treatment. It involves providers being involved in the manufacture of a drug. We've never had to do that in the NHS before. And it has been in a context of where we're uncertain of the true benefit, and actually the treatments are potentially quite toxic as well. So there's a question around patient safety that still, while mostly resolved, is something that we need to manage going forward. And I've forgotten your question, Deb.
Can I butt in there?
Yeah,
so there is looking at
that's right.
the future and how we need to draw that future. I think it is important we strategize on this. There are a myriad of companies out there producing. Some of them are Me Too products, as I would use that term. It's hard to say it's a Me Too product with such a novel agent, but the targets are at this moment mainly in the hematological zone, in ALL, in lymphoma, in myeloma. These seem to be positive, and there are some in acute myeloid leukemia. There are a whole slew of targets in the solid cancer zone, as well as other targets in things that aren't even cancer. But either way, there are many of them. They're all similar, the process and platform that they're using, but they're all different. And each company will have a process which will be agreed by either the FDA or EMA. We need, in some ways, to make it easier for the deliverers of this product to have them all get together and agree on a consensus view of how they're going to produce the products, their sort of the way these products wing round the world and how they come back to us, how we have to store them and how we have to deliver them. Now, some of that may be changed as we move away from what is the autologous product, where we collect the T cells from our patient sitting in our hospital, to a more allogeneic product, but that's several years away. But standardization from the companies would be great. It would then allow specifications to be created that are standardized, not one for every company. And that would ease the company's approach to this. But we are this whole process is in its infancy.
Sure.
And, when you're a child, you fall over quite a lot. You sometimes do things wrong, and you sometimes get slapped on the wrist. But either way, we should do this together to learn from each other. And I think once we have got these first few through, and we've learned that actually the outcomes are pretty good. There is some real-world data from US colleagues, because they've had the product available for a little longer than we have, showing that the data from the trials has been substantiated with early follow-up, of course, in the real-world data set. So that's a very positive thing, and we want this field to flourish. The companies want it to flourish. Patients definitely want it to flourish, because it has this is a treatment for many patients who've come to the end of the line with what we would consider our standard therapies. But working more collaboratively, in a way, getting the companies to go away and meet up and thrash it out and then come to us with a standard process would be fantastic, if at all possible.
So collaborating within industry as well as
Absolutely.
with the NHS and yourselves.
We're good at collaborating, believe it or not. Some people don't like to think that, but we are, and we work very well with our commissioners. Someone always says, I'll crack a little joke, but someone says, what's more important, the relationship with your manager or the relationship with your wife? And I sort of say, well, actually, I can divorce my wife, but I can't divorce my manager. So, it is imperative that we do get this right, because if we do it well, patients access this treatment rapidly, effectively. If we do it badly, we end up with the situation. And I don't want to crow, because I talk to my Italian colleagues. I'm Italian, so I talk to them, and I talk to the French colleagues and German colleagues. They are, as Brad said earlier, there's a little bit of envy that we've got it right, which is, we should take the credit for that. Nice to hear.
I think the unifying rally call here was patient access. We wanted to be the first country in Europe to offer CAR-T treatments to patients, and we got damn close. Didn't quite get there, but it's one of the the great examples of how when we all pull together, as Tony was saying, across government with industry, we can really do this quickly. And most of the time, 99% right.
99%.
But it also helps because we then become attractive to industry partners who may not have thought that, perhaps they thought of old, well, the UK will be a little slower in this process, they won't be ready to develop and introduce new novel therapies and trials. That they may think, actually, this is a great place to bring novel therapies, and I know they're in trials, they're not going to be for every patient, but it will give patients something else that they wouldn't have had if the industry partner hadn't have come to the UK.
Yeah, definitely. So to help people learn about how to collaborate effectively in introducing something this new, were there any learnings or any issues that arose during this process that you think we could have handled better, either as, any three of the bodies that we're representing?
I think, as Tony was saying, I'm going to focus on all the successes here. As Tony was saying, we did do some test runs through NICE and the Office for Market Access, so we had a sense of how this would work through our standard appraisal process. At NHS England, we had early engagement from both companies who are now offering products, and I think where that has worked really well, it's been at quite a senior level, and we've been able to have a very clear direction on how we're going to then bring these drugs into the market.
Sure.
And I think as well it's been, and it may sometimes feel a little uncomfortable for companies to do this, but there has been a requirement for a lot of transparency, trust, openness in those relationships. And while we can have those conversations confidentially, we always need to be doing that in a bubble of trust, I guess. And I think, again, part of the success here with CAR-T is that we were able to trust each other. It's such a game-changing product. We would be foolish not to do that, and I think we've demonstrated that we can do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important that when you're doing something that's so groundbreaking, that requires so much input from so many people, that there's no game playing there, that there is absolute honesty and openness about the whole sequence of events.
And then in terms of some of the lessons that NHS England has learned, at least, we need to be starting some of this planning a lot sooner. So we know we have a pipeline coming and we're already starting to plan for additional products that are coming down the line. We need to involve our providers probably a bit more in that process as well.
I think it's important too. I thought the great thing about the process that we went through on the specifications, that it was clinically heavy, in that we had the bone marrow transplant clinical reference group, we had the intensive care clinical reference group, we had the neuro reference group, as well as the Cancer Drugs Fund present. So all clinicians who had a really good understanding of some of the complexities of this process. Some of the clinicians had already had access and were treating patients in trials, so they had a good knowledge. Also, people who were able to interdigitate with US colleagues and ask them the right questions and get the right answers about what we required, what was the entry price to this system, not about the cost of the drug, but what did we require on site in each of the institutions to deliver this well. And we set I thought, a sensible bar based on what our American colleagues had said to us. Now, initially some people said, oh, why are you setting it so high? Well, right at the start, the patient public voice in the group said, because of patient safety, and that has to be paramount,
Sure.
that what we all want is to deliver this product safely. Now, I think what it has meant initially was that the sort of centres that likely had the resources, because they're doing allogeneic bone marrow transplantation, were the likely centres to get selected in first run. But we used our third-party colleagues, the European Bone Marrow Transplant Group, as well as the industry that had created this onboarding process to ensure that you had the right sort of facilities and infrastructure in place. But we also used our colleagues within the European Bone Marrow Transplant Group to assess centres against the immune effector compliance. And interestingly, the EMA has now accepted that EBMT will act
that's great news.
From the point of view of collecting longer term data, so that this registry is seen as important. And it meant that it was seen as fair. The approach to the decision making as to which centres would be selected has been seen as fair, and then equitable access based on distances is seen as fair. And therefore, if a patient in this country requires this therapy, they're going to get it reasonably close to home. So I think that has been the benefit. I think the longer term issue for me, and I have discussed this with many, which is at the moment we are in its infancy. How many can a centre cope with? How many of these? Because I've asked this question of US colleagues and they give me a straight answer. I won't tell you the numbers that they say, but it's a resource implication on standard beds, on intensive care beds, and the specialty clinicians who we need, the training of nurses, the training of laboratory, stem cell laboratory doctors. It's quite significant. And the training programme, I mean, we've trained essentially, by the time we finish, nearly 300 staff in the process and the safety requirements for these processes. So that's a job in itself. Does any country have the resource of individuals who can actually deliver this and have a good working knowledge of it? No, we need to train those individuals. So that's where Health Education England need to step in and help us develop and deliver that, so that we are fit for purpose going forward.
And so that you've got enough qualified individuals that can actually
absolutely,
deliver the treatment.
Absolutely. So I think we're getting there. The industry, I think it's true to say, even the industry are sort of going to struggle a little bit to have all the right people in place. So we're learning together, hand in hand, and that's our collaboration. And hopefully, we can flex off each other and teach each other some of the nuances, so that the process that we've delivered here in the UK, I would say it's a skeleton process. You don't have to take the full body, but you can take certain parts of it and you can use that in France or in Germany. And the Germans have, I spoke to their meeting a couple of years ago, have taken to hand what I called my phone a friend slide, which was asking a certain colleague in the US what are their requirements that they thought they needed. Well, the Germans have actually said, we'll go for that. So we're learning off each other.
And helping others.
Absolutely. The door is always open to help.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And Brad, for yourself, how do you think NHS England are going to approach this plethora that are coming along now? We'll go back to that.
That's a big question, Deb. So we are really looking at the pipeline in a lot of detail, looking at all the topics that are coming along, and as Tony was saying, we're trying to move away from this product by product specification to see how we would move this to a more standardised approach. It's involving a lot of conversations and consultation with companies. I think the fact that we've now got experience of how we can do this with 3 products that are now in the market, we have some touchstones that we can go to in terms of what has worked well in the process. But we really are starting to look in that more detail around how are these products performing? Are they the game changers that these first couple of products were? How do we need to change the system? And again, as Tony was saying, all the questions around, do we have the capacity in the service? Do we have the staff? And while they're big questions, and we're moving at pace to try and answer all of them, I think it is through those sort of various work streams that we've got going on at NHS England to try and understand how we bring additional supply into the market to meet that demand.
Will you be involving industry in helping to develop these work streams and gathering further insights?
Absolutely. I think underpinning all of these different work streams, there's a whole industry engagement strategy as well. And I guess the big question that we all have is how do we help or create the safe space for companies to speak openly in front of one another? I know NICE have some really innovative safe harbours where they can talk to government agencies in multiples all at once, but we haven't yet got an example of how we do that with multiple companies all at once. So
I don't think anyone's fixed that just yet.
So I'm not sure if that's a step too far, but I do think at some point we're going to need to try and have conversations with multiple companies in the room at some point, not in the too distant future.
I think the issue is that
and challenging.
As part of the Innovate UK bids that went through and the ATMP centres that were created out of those Innovate UK bids, we defined ATMPs, or we tried to say that some ATMPs are quite complex to deliver and have significant toxicities, but other ATMPs are less toxic. And so it's trying to get that gauge of what impact it's going to have on centres trying to deliver each of these new products coming through. Some can be delivered reasonably safely in an ambulatory setting with regular outpatient visits, and others will require significant inpatient requirements. So we've also got, here we're talking about CAR-T, the Novartis product, and the other products coming through have been chimeric antigen receptor T cells against the two hematological disorders. But we've got gene therapy now for other hematological disorders, including haemophilia, gene therapy for sickle cell disease. We've got gene therapy for many neurological disorders that have, I think some have been FDA approved now, and likely that they will be approved. We need to have an ability to manage these. So for NHS institutions, each institution is going to have a biological safety committee to assess all of these products. Once they're out with the trial scenario and they're in routine clinical practice, a chief executive and a medical director of an institution wants to know that patients under their roof are getting these products safely. So we need to create all of this in the local setting, in each of the centres, and we need to have great oversight of this process. I've set up a ATMP oversight committee to ensure that I've got all the people concerned. Talking to haematologists, you know what you're going to get, i.e. that we've been used to doing this for a long, long time. But when a neurosurgeon approaches you, or a cardiologist or a cardiothoracic surgeon or an ophthalmologist, they may or may not understand all the nuances of this therapy area. And there's going to need to be a lot of guidance in that process. And I think that is essentially the same issue that NHS England may well find themselves in, that there's so much coming in from so many different disease area directions that that having enough resource and enough knowledge that people understand each of these processes of using genetically modified products of one sort or another.
And how do you transfer that expertise from an area where it's sitting at the moment to the wider areas that you were talking about, in the face of not really having enough staff to deliver it in the first place? How's that?
Well, I think it will, and that this is my view, I think it's a view held by many others. To start with, this will grow out of bone marrow transplant services, cellular therapy facilities. And indeed, in the United States, many institutions are renaming themselves. They're no longer bone marrow transplant programs, they're cellular therapy programs. So they've tweaked that actually the future is not just doing the old minimally manipulated bone marrow transplant and donor lymphocyte infusion. It's doing a cell therapy return with a cytotoxic T lymphocyte against a virus, a mesenchymal stromal stem cell for patients with graft versus host disease, a gamma delta T cell, an NK CAR. So the whole panoply of treatments out there that are going to require people with the appropriate knowledge to direct it and ensure that it happens safely. Some of it will not end up coming to market, I suspect. Some of it will, some of it won't, and I wish I could pick the winner, but I can't. So we have to work through the trial processes. So we have to have a trial system here in the UK and the hospitals concerned that's fit for purpose and that can allow us to do these things safely without being killed, as one of my colleagues down in Plymouth said recently, with the bureaucracy of trials, which is killing the whole system. But either way, we need to get them from trial into clinical practice and then have the infrastructure in place, which I think we will have. I think we've got the right people around the country to do that. And then we need to bring in the other specialities into this group of cellular therapists within institutions to allow us to develop this safely. And that is our future. I don't think this one's going away. Some people say, it's just this one drug and you'll be fine. I'm not sure about that. There's so much.
Yeah, if you look at the horizon scanning, it's just immense. There's so much going on.
If you go to clinicaltrials.org, I think you can. There's a very big blob over the United States and a very big blob over China and quite a big blob over Europe. The number of trials that are live in this zone. So I don't think we can run away from it. We have to stand up. We've done a great job in introducing it. As I always say, getting to the top of Mount Everest is tough. Staying there is even harder. So I think we've got to the top of Mount Everest on this one. I think we need to do quite a bit of work now on ensuring that we safely guide it to stay there and do the right thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as Tony was saying that part of how we're approaching this pipeline is by making sure that the products that we actually have live now are successful, and that we learn from how we've implemented these, and do that as best as we can, so that we can make sure that anything else is going to come through in a similar manner. And to plug my own team, the Cancer Drugs Fund, part of the reason that we've been in the centre of this and holding a lot of the reins is because we provide the commissioning solution in some respects, in that we have that special space to bring treatments where the outcomes aren't yet certain, or we don't yet have a cost-effective price, and there are question marks around that. So patients can get access in the meantime. Sure. But as we try to bring a treatment in, as we do in the CDF, we come up against all these issues that Tony's just highlighted, and that's why I think it's quite useful to have this one team in the centre coordinating some of that, although not all topics are going to be cancer going forward.
No, it's going to be much wider than that. And can the Cancer Drug Fund cope with all these
we think so,
new things coming through?
We think so. We'll see how it goes.
Now, I understand that we've got some questions come through which aren't actually visible to me at the moment.
But we can maybe come back to that.
But we can maybe come back to that in a little while when the screen's back on again. So, going back to our list of questions that we had, I think in terms of learnings, how would you say that all three parties have learned as a consequence of this for the future, and what are the key things that we should take forward into future collaborations?
I think one of the interesting things for me was that, of course, we were horizon. So as a transplant community, we were horizon scanning CAR-T. In fact, we'd been involved in a trial for 3 years before this got licensed. So, we were acutely aware of this zone. And on a number of occasions in meetings, we felt, having listened to the US story of how they introduced the product, that we would have preferred if we would have been able to have engagement from the companies a little earlier on, because it was, of course, the NHS can't use a product until it's been given the green light and is funded. But knowing that the onboarding from the American experience can take anything between 6 and 15 months. That's what they said at the centres.
And it'd be quite time intensive.
Time intensive, quite a lot of work from the centres, which of course the centres were keen. You would have lots of people who were really supportive of doing this, and they wanted to get on with it. But NHS England made it clear that the centres could not be approached because they hadn't decided who the centres were. I think now with if I can call it the second phase, that we've identified those initial centres, we can probably release the tightening on that one, because we know these are the centres already doing it, and if there are going to be new products coming through, it's sensible to allow the companies to approach those centres as part of their early touchpoint onboarding, so that when we get to the decision point that these products are going to be agreed, assuming they are going forward, then those centres are halfway there. Because it sort of felt that I was being asked to do a Usain Bolt on this one, run like merry hell as fast as possible to get to the finish line, when I could have taken a gentle walk there if I'd have been allowed to have another 6 months to get to that point.
Yeah, and I think just the difficulty of actually getting everybody in one room. The simplest of things take ages, so the longer run up you have, the better, without question.
And also, suddenly you end up, because we're twined at the hip on this one, legal documents are being signed. I've never had, a drug is made available by NHS England or NICE or whoever it is, and it comes into our pharmacy, and we have processes, we have to ensure that it's given safely. But I've never had to sign personally legal documents sent to me by the companies. I'm thinking, whoa, that's interesting. If I put my name to this, is it trouble for me? So doctors and other managerial staff and pharmacists, because this is a drug, it runs through pharmacy, we deliver it on their behalf. So everyone is suddenly in a position that they're unused to.
Same here. I've never had to sign anything like that before either. So
you've probably got
different.
You've probably got an army of people who know what they're talking about. I have myself and an elf, in the back room who know what they're doing in this sort of zone. So it's been tough for everyone. So I think the sooner we can start to talk and collaborate and make life easier, so that we have a single form that goes to every trust in the country that has to be signed off, or that it's signed off by NHS England, just to take a little bit of pressure off each of the individual centres, because I think that is tough.
Yeah.
And I think as well, from the NHS England perspective as well, it's fair to say that we were actually having to invent some of the paperwork on this one as well, because again, it's never been done, and some of the contracts we're having to ask the centres to sign, and the level of involvement we had with the companies in terms of ensuring that we had the right information in the contracts as well.
It's hugely complicated.
There were a lot of handoffs between all three different groups, I guess, but we got there in the end.
Now, I've had a couple of questions in this very high-tech format, because I'm afraid the screen went down. And the question is, what was Novartis's involvement in the introduction of CAR-T, and how has the collaboration worked for Novartis? And Deb, could you please tell us from the industry point of view how collaboration works for Novartis? So similar questions, so I'll make an attempt to answer them both in the same few sentences. I think this particular introduction of CAR-T has been really different from anything that we've ever done before. This isn't a normal launch where you just bring a product to market, you get it through NICE, you get it on the market, and then it's used and you walk away. The important thing here was that we had to, right from the very beginning, we had to engage with Brad and his colleagues at NHS England, with Tony and all the other centres, so that we could actually make sure that we were ready to go when we got the approval for this. So we had teams of people going into the hospitals, training the staff, demonstrating how, the simplest of things like the carrier, how that worked, and how all the technical stuff was done. That's not my area, by the way. Don't ask me any questions about that. And then we had to work really closely with Brad and his colleagues as well to work on how we were going to get this into the CDF, the sort of parameters that we'd be looking at. And I think all the way through, what we've found is that both NHS England and the providers have been very open and very honest with us, and we've done the same in response. I think there's been a huge level of trust here. So I think that's been the important thing from my point of view. And it's been really rewarding to do that, because, as Brad said, we're actually now seeing patients get treated with it. So it's all been worth it in the end.
May I ask a supplementary question?
Please.
In terms of lessons learned from your perspective,
are there... to post it? No.
No. In terms of the lessons learned from your perspective, are there tips for NHS England and others to be taking back and thinking on?
I think the earlier the better is really key. And to Tony's point about early engagement with the centres as well, and that's probably fixed now, as you say, because we know who the centres are, and we'll know who the next centres are as it rolls out. But talk to us early and see if we can get everything signed more than a few days before everything happens, so that we're not hauling lawyers out of holidays and things like that. And I think it'll work a lot smoother next time, because we know that now.
Yeah,
but it is key to have great strength in the institutions, because you will come with your onboarding team who have stem cell laboratory knowledge, quality assurance knowledge, and they meet our people who are also steeped in whether it's in apheresis area and understanding JC requirements, and also understanding the quality management of the stem cell laboratory and the requirements. And what we find is we will sometimes ask, we serve you a curveball. Yeah, we will ask you a question and you go, I've never heard that question before. And they're not asking it for fun, they're asking it because it's a legitimate question that is going to impact on the delivery of service. So I think in a way, for the company, they're amassing that knowledge, and they need to share that knowledge, just as we do through JC, which is that why reinvent the wheel? There's someone somewhere in the world that's probably got a similar problem to you, because Novartis or any of the other companies have touch points around the world in this treatment option. We need to learn from that so that we can teach other people what went right and what went wrong, and find things that I call, we're in a zone of the unknown unknowns, as a certain American presidential candidate said. But we are in unknown territory, and I think we're all leaning on each other. So if you've got information, believe it or not, I want to know about it because I'm likely to learn something new. And that's what our stem cell people said. Just a simple, very simple thing. In the UK, the MHRA are important to us, and stem cells are stored in liquid nitrogen tanks, and there was a question of what is the storage temperature? And we all go, it's hard to believe that they're different, but they are. Two companies have a different storage policy, and then when we approach them and say, well, can we overwrap, which is a common thing we do in the UK, the answer is we're not sure about that because of the process, etc. So I think we're about to engage both at a simple delivery level, but also an intellectual level, as well as a managerial level, which, as you say, is most unusual for you and definitely most unusual for us. So.
Yeah, but it keeps it interesting.
It does keep it interesting, on our toes.
Yes. Is there anything else that either of you would like to say before we wrap up to underline?
I think it's something that I've heard both of you say that I've been reminded by is the extent to which people involved in this process went above and beyond to get this treatment available to patients. I think industry providers, our partners at NICE, Public Health England, elsewhere, NHS England as well. I've just been so impressed by how everyone has pulled out all the stops to...
So much weekend working.
To get this done. And the number of emails, I get on a Sunday afternoon around this. But it has been fantastic to work in, huge learning. As Tony's been saying, it's a novel area. We're going to continue learning, but I think it's clear that we're all up for the challenge and we've demonstrated what we can do. So we've set the benchmark very high.
Definitely.
I think I would like to see there are education fora that are developing to try and ensure, because as a transplanter I've always not changed my view, which is I can say I'm a good transplanter, but I can only transplant a patient who is referred to me.
Sure.
So if we're going to have equitable access in this country and any other country around the world, we need to ensure that the company are also supporting that education piece. So not just talking to the key opinion leaders in the centres, that there are already the CAR-T centres or cellular therapy centres, but going out into the hospitals, district general hospitals, which do the bulk of the work in this country, and ensuring that they have adequate knowledge, that they understand the pathways, that the NHS England pathway, which we discuss and know, and if you sit on the panels that are involved in ensuring equity of access, we all understand what the requirements are. But we can't guarantee that our patient population out there have a knowledge of that. You have the charities that are helping, the Anthony Nolan, Leukemia UK, the lymphoma associations are indeed helping enormously to fill some of that gap. But we need the companies to help us create the knowledge base out there through their representatives and running courses. And then we do need to get this onto training programs. So that's why I think HEE, Health Education England, do really need to start thinking about, do we need to start creating post-CCT fellowships in cell therapy so that this country is ready and to go when any of the novel new therapies come through. So I think that those are, for me, the two key messages: training, and education. And then I think if we get all of that right, we're on a solid ground, solid footing for the future. Because if we get those wrong, then this is going to be a tricksy time, that we won't have enough resource to deliver what we need to deliver.
Yes, and we're certainly at a very exciting time in terms of these developing areas. So with that, I think we can probably wrap up. No more post-it notes came through, so I'm assuming that there aren't any more questions from the audience. But if you do have any further questions, you can always tweet at HSJ events, and we'll do our best to answer them over that. So with that, I'd like to say thanks very much to Tony and to Brad. It's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
A great pleasure, and hopefully we'll be seeing lots more products coming through.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thanks.
Thank you very much.